Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome. Thank you for arranging this wonderful weather. I appreciate it. Where I come from, the mayor is in charge of the weather from May till September, and then the county takes over. I'm not sure how it works here. But I appreciate the chance to be with you, and I appreciate how warmly we've been received. We had a great conversation just now about some of the issues that are facing farmers in this country. I'm going to try to lean back so feedback doesn't come at us. I want to thank Larry Hodgson and the Cedar County Democrats. Thank you for reminding everybody that there are Democrats in every county of this country. And Maddie Smith, who you just met a moment ago, our fantastic organizer for this event and for this area. Please make sure to get to know her, bend her ear after this event. We want to make sure that we get to know you as well as possible as we're getting ready to move on toward caucus season. Every time I come to this state, I remember that this state changed the course of my life a little bit. Because when I was here for a campaign, not my own, but President Obama's campaign, then Senator Obama, a couple friends and I got into a car and we were assigned to some rural areas in south central Iowa, around Creston, Ringgold, Decatur County. And I met so many people there that were preserving a way of life that many had forgotten about, and also so many people who were preparing to serve in the military that it got me thinking about whether it was my turn, and that was the beginning of a journey that led me all the way to Afghanistan and back. So that's one time that Iowa has shaped my life. I'm hoping that Iowa will be a decisive factor in my life next year as well. I'm running for president because I'm worried that America is running out of time. I think we're in a make or break moment for our country. And I also think that it's not too late. I'm not just talking about the problems that this president and this presidency have created, although I believe there's an awful lot of problems that this president has created. I think that we need to speak up when we see demagoguery, when we see white nationalism, especially when it leads to violence against people in America. We see demonization of immigrants who are our friends and our neighbors and who fuel our economies, especially in rural parts of the country. We got to put forward something better. But I also think that the sort of person who's in the Oval Office right now doesn't get elected unless there's already some serious issues going on. I know a lot of people who were under no illusions about the character of this individual, but made a decision to more or less vote to burn the house down because there's something so deep going wrong in our country that people are looking for anything that represents a departure from business as usual. Now, we got our departure. I don't think this country's any better for it. Now we've got to talk about what it's actually going to take to move forward. And I think my generation feels that especially acutely, growing up in the era of school shootings and watching them turn into mall shootings and church shootings and concert shootings. Belonging to a generation that's the first in American history to be headed toward doing worse economically than our parents if we don't do something different, which is why we better do something different. Belonging to a generation that is the first to spend the majority of our adult lives dealing with climate change that we must confront in order to be able to get ahead, especially if we want the next generation to be able to live well. And if we want to fix these issues, we got to act now. We are just a few years away from when the average house in this country will cost $500,000, and the average college education will cost over $200,000. We can't go on like this. We can't go on with gross domestic product going up and life expectancy going down. We got to make a change. And I believe this is our best shot. But we can't accept the unacceptable any longer in this country, and we can't go back to a conversation that revolves around the same policy arguments, sometimes the same characters who've been dominating our politics my entire lifetime. As long as I've been alive, we've been accepting the unacceptable in this country, tolerating the idea that Americans, for some reason, should be the only people in the developed world who don't have access to universal health care. That's not acceptable. Tolerating the idea that we're the only country in the world where the kind of violence we see is routine. When there is no honest reason for our democracy to be in the shape that it's in, with no real reason to allow districts to be drawn the way they are in most of this country, or let fellow U.S. citizens in D.C. or Puerto Rico not have political representation. We have got to accept our responsibility to change what has been unacceptable and make it better. And I believe that means structural reform. And structural reform in America has almost always begun in the heartland. It's begun in the Midwest, where people saw that their lives, our lives, were not going well enough. And we took action to change it. So I'm before you as a different kind of messenger with a different kind of message, focused on American values and determined that we take the idea of values away from sounding like it belongs only on one side of the aisle. Because the values that we celebrate, the values that are spoken about on the Iowa state flag, they're not Republican values and conservative values, they're American values that we share and that lead in a progressive direction when you take them seriously. You know, we take our liberties. Now, we hear about certain kinds of liberties a lot in politics right now. We hear about the liberty of a bank to operate without too many regulations. Far less about the liberty that we would enjoy if we all had access to health care. Because you're not free if you don't have health care. Or the liberty that comes with being able to organize for a good day's pay for a good day's work, which is why we have been the party that stands with labor. I think the real freedom comes by way of having access to education, which is why I'm going to start out by appointing a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education. So you see that? That's an American value that can take you to a very progressive place. Same thing with patriotism. I am done with people talking about patriotism like it belongs on one side of the aisle. I'm pretty sure the flag that was attached to my shoulder when I stepped off that C-17 in Afghanistan did not belong to one political party. It was an American flag for all of us, representing, among other things, the idea that if we don't like how our leadership is acting, we have not only the right but the obligation to speak up critically about that. And not have anybody question our loyalty to the republic for which it stands, let alone tell us to go back to where we came from. Especially if where he came from is Michigan. If we're serious about patriotism, then we got to talk about what security is actually going to mean in the 21st century. And it's not something you can solve with a 17th century idea like putting up a wall. Not when we got cybersecurity and election security threats coming our ways. Not when we're still stuck in an endless war that I thought I was one of the last guys turning out the lights on 5 years ago. If our service members are willing to summon the courage to go put their lives on the line overseas, then our members of Congress ought to have the courage to take tough votes on whether we ought to go to war and whether we ought to stay there. That's a security issue. Gun safety is literally a security issue. And there is no reason why the Second Amendment has to stop us from implementing common sense reforms that are going to save lives in every part of the country. These are our values: freedom, security, democracy. By the way, call me old-fashioned, but I would think in a democracy, it might be a good idea to just pick our president by counting up all the votes and giving it to the person who got the most. And speaking of values, time to establish once and for all that God does not belong to a political party in this country. Scripture tells us that we ought to lift up those most in need, concern ourselves with the poor, identify with the prisoner, welcome the stranger, and love our neighbor. We are not seeing that in Washington today, and people of faith need to know they have a choice when it comes to what kind of moral as well as political leadership we're going to send to Washington. Of course, it's not enough to have the right values. You got to actually have a plan. And when you're a mayor responsible for everything from a water utility to economic development, you know the importance of actually knowing what it's going to take to get something done. That's why when we talk about health care, we don't just say what we wish would happen. We got a plan for Medicare for all who want it, so that every American can get comprehensive, affordable insurance and opt out of the private system if the private system's letting them down. And there's far too many Americans who find that the corporate system's letting them down. So we're not going to order them off of it. We're going to give people a better choice and watch Americans vote with their feet. because you ought to be able to get health care wherever you live and whoever you are in this country. That's why we put out an action plan on gun violence last week that puts $1 billion toward the programs that counter violent extremism that this president has cut. Instead, we need to expand it and build up the civic and political power to get done what we have to on safety and to beat back this kind of extremism. By the way, I would argue that one way that we could send a message on white nationalism would be to get J.D. Scholten elected to Congress and send Steve King into retirement. It's why we got a specific plan to match the ambition of the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe, but this time invested right here at home with a Douglas Plan for Black Americans that tackles systemic racism by increasing entrepreneurship, tripling number of entrepreneurs from underserved areas in a decade, and brings criminal justice reform so that we can actually believe that our justice system delivers justice. That's something that will make us all better off. That's why we got plans on national service to knit together our social fabric with 1 million paid service opportunities for our youth when I'm president, so that you can have the same bonding that I had when I was overseas in a vehicle with people of different politics and different backgrounds, different religions and races, without having to go to war to get that. I see here in Iowa the heart for service, and we ought to honor that and support it with our federal policies. We got a plan to make our economy work. We got a plan to make sure that health care reaches everywhere in this country. And today, I appreciate the opportunity to share with you a plan on how to build economies in rural America. Because rural America is central to our country's past, present, and future. It is the main source of food and energy for our country. And new generations of people from all over the world are joining descendants of earlier generations. It gives me great optimism and possibility about what we have in rural America, but too often it's treated as an afterthought. And it's not just in our government. I remember when I got to college, nobody could remember whether I was from Indiana, Iowa, or Idaho. It was all the same. And that neglect is starting to play out, and it's starting to have some really rough consequences. When I was born, the life expectancy in rural America and in a big city was the same. Now, it's got the biggest gap in the last 50 years. Things are headed in the wrong direction. As we know, farm incomes have dropped dramatically in the last 5 years, largely thanks to corporate consolidation, monopolies in agriculture, but also a reckless trade policy that I can't even call a policy, just a pattern of poking other countries in the eye, not worried about the consequences for American farmers. This is not just numbers on a page. This is not just a political talking point. Some people really need to care about agriculture, specifically those people who eat food. The rest don't have to worry about it, I guess. Everybody else needs to care about this. Pay attention. But right now, we're seeing the rise of what are called deaths of despair. We see rural hospitals closing their door. They just lost the birthing unit in Marshalltown, and there's several more that look like they could be the next to go. And I know that there are parents wondering if their kids will have the opportunity to stay in the communities that produce them. And too many people in the new generation are answering that question with a move away. We can fix that. And I'm motivated to fix that, coming from a community that lost far too many of our people when factories closed and opportunity left. So I've been going around the country having great conversations about what it's going to take to get ahead. And this isn't about a checklist based on ideology. This is about what it's actually going to take to improve everyday life. So, with a new way of thinking, my administration will unlock the potential of rural America in new ways. We're going to invest in making it possible for people in rural parts of the country to start new businesses and seize new opportunities. We're going to encourage neighboring counties to work together, because these days, your biggest challenge isn't the next county over, it's China. But we still have trouble walking the walk of regional cooperation. Federal government could help with that by creating incentives to develop 1,000 regional innovation clusters for communities that decide to team up with their neighbors and make it possible for them to pursue new opportunities with talent, training, and technology. We're going to ensure that an apprentice program in a growing industry is available within a 30-mile radius of every American. And we are going to welcome the potential of immigration to help us grow our communities by establishing a community renewal visa program for communities that choose to welcome new Americans with an incentive that allows you to get a fast track to a green card if you commit to staying in those communities and helping them grow. In my experience, the people with the hardest and cruelest attitudes toward immigrants are people who don't know any. And ironically, it's in our rural communities there are a lot of people who know full well the kind of value that comes from opening our communities to the growth that will not come any other way. We're going to expand the Boots to Business program, knowing that rural America disproportionately produces veterans, like the young people that I met when I was down in south central Iowa more than a decade ago. There's a program that makes it possible for more veterans to get to the boardroom, but we're not investing enough in it. We will, on my watch. And we're going to pay more attention to education in rural America. I married an educator, so I get an education about education every day. We know we got a teacher shortage in rural America that is costing us our future. So we have an initiative to reduce the teacher shortage by half, increasing teacher salaries for rural Title I schools, offering loan forgiveness if you choose to serve in those communities, and making it easier for people to get certified and qualified in the first place. America needs teachers, like that Ray Gun t-shirt tells us. And rural America needs teachers most of all. That's why we want to offer free public college tuition for low and middle income students and put $25 billion into HBCUs and other minority serving and tribal colleges that are such an important part of rural as well as urban America. We want to create satellite college centers and hubs so that students can attend classes locally more often, even if you're far away from a main campus. And if we do that right, we will grow the share of rural adults with a bachelor's degree by 25% in a decade or less. We've got to act because education is opportunity, and opportunity ought to knock on the doors of Tipton just as it does on the doors of Wall Street. We're also going to need good infrastructure if we want to be able to grow and compete and succeed in rural America. That means our roads and our bridges and the really unsexy stuff that only a mayor can love, which is our sewers and our water systems. We got to get that right. But this president's only plan on infrastructure, it turned out, was for our local communities to bear the burden, which we've been doing all along. There needs to be the right kind of support for that. And that includes digital infrastructure, which is why we are proposing an $80 billion investment, Internet for all, during my presidency to make sure that every American has a way to get access to high-speed broadband no matter where you are in the country. It means taking advantage of telemedicine and making sure that we never again use emergency rooms as our primary care system for physical illnesses and sheriff's departments as our primary care system for mental illnesses and addiction. I believe that we can build a Silicon Prairie. We're hard to work at it where I come from, and I think it do Iowa a lot of good too, because rural America is ready to compete and thrive if we have the infrastructure. We're going to protect farmers and workers with measures from reinvigorating antitrust enforcement to ensuring that workers have access to the wage protections and the support that they deserve. And finally, when it comes to tackling the threat of climate disruption, instead of telling rural America that they're part of the problem, I think the time has come to enlist and empower farmers and rural Americans to be part of the solution, because nobody has more on the line. So when I get a question like the young man in Shenandoah who asked me how rural America, how a farm like the one he was living on could be part of the answer, I want to be able to respond by saying that the federal government has his back, supporting sustainable practices and pursuing the research and development that'll actually make these amazing practices and promises of various potential actually pencil out for American farmers so that you can do them. But for that, we've got to actually make that a priority in our country. And when we do, we will see farms in this area as much a symbol of tackling climate disruption as an electric vehicle plug-in point somewhere in Los Angeles. That's what the future of climate looks like in this country. I'm doing this because I'm hoping to have kids one day too. And when they're old enough to ask me what we did in 2020, I want to be able to look them in the eye and tell them that we did what it took to get America to a better place. I want to tell them that we did what it took to bring about the day when race was no predictor on how long you were going to live or how much you were going to earn or what your relationship with law enforcement was going to be. I want to tell them about this crazy time when we lost 100 Americans to gun violence every day and that we came together and did what it took to make it an extremely rare occurrence in any community. I'll tell them how a woman's right to choose came this close to vanishing in this decade, but we came together and turned that around. I'll tell them about how we lived in an economy so unequal that if you worked at Walmart, you make $11 an hour, but if you owned it, you made $4 million an hour. And that we took the steps to get to where a rising tide actually lifts all boats in this economy, instead of it just being a saying. But in order to make that happen, we got to act now. And as you know, as Iowans, you've got a thumb on the scale of the American political process. You are the vetting committee that looks us all over, all 50 of us, kicks the tires on us a little bit, pokes and prods us, see if we're serious, see if we have what it takes to deliver, and then renders a verdict. And I am hoping I can look to you for a favorable verdict. So are you willing to help us change the way the future is going to work? Well, that's pretty encouraging. I don't want to talk at you the whole time. Let's do some questions. I think we got mic runners out. There's one. Just put your hand up and she will come your way.
I just wanted to ask, with such a big investment in the internet, how will it personally benefit the rural communities to have access to high speed?
Thanks. I think it's so important right now because being connected is the coin of the realm. Think about those apprenticeships I was talking about. We want to see more apprenticeships, right? We want to see more opportunities for technical education. But if we have high-speed internet access, then you don't always have to commute all the way to a main campus of a college or a technical school in order to get training. You can mix in-person classroom training with the kind of virtual and computer-based training that can help supplement that. It would help with telemedicine. So everything from stroke treatment to diabetes treatment gets a lot easier if somebody can monitor things from a distance and then complement the in-person care you're getting at a doctor's office or a clinic. We got to close the homework gap. Just about every school now is assigning homework that you can't do unless you have an internet connection, but not everybody's got an internet connection. We got to do something about that. And these are just some of the ways that we're better off. Not to mention the fact that as we discussed today when I was meeting with some agricultural leaders in this community, farming itself is an increasingly technology-intensive practice. I think folks in their imagination still picture things like farming and, for that matter, manufacturing in this kind of real low-tech sense. This is all about technology because it's all about information. And if you're in the business of figuring out complicated forces acting on your business, from weather to price fluctuations around the globe to, unfortunately, whatever the president decided to tweet today, you need to be able to be wired in and be able to get that information quickly. And we will not be successful in our most potentially competitive rural communities unless we make sure that that kind of access is available to everybody. Yeah. Thank you. Hi.
When you talk about paying farmers for conservation, will the incentives be attractive enough or feasible enough for our farmers to want to enroll into those programs, and will it be comparable to a cash crop?
Thank you. I think we got to make it competitive. We got to make it comparable. Look, the entire world has an interest in us making sure that we implement more sustainable practices. You look at, science tells us that soil management has the potential to take as much carbon out of the atmosphere as the whole global transportation sector puts in. Now, the science is there, the technology is not. So that's why we need federal investment in the R&D to get it done. But whether it's different kind of practices with cover or different kinds of materials that you're going to be asked to use, it's one thing if we're saying, we really think it'd be good for everybody for you to switch over and do this, and sorry about the haircut you're going to take or if it's going to run you out of business, right? That is not a convincing message for us to have. And I do think that's feeding into this idea that rural America is the problem. If we can pay farmers to not sell their goods to China, we can pay farmers to adopt these practices that are going to benefit all of us. And we need to make sure that the right kind of incentives from the federal government do make it pencil out so that it's a good business decision. Otherwise, we're just asking you to do something that you could never sustain. And that's not fair, and it doesn't make any sense. Thank you. All right, back over this way.
Yes, I farm, and this is about health care. My family has 2 plans, very good plans. Our premiums next year are going to be $42,000. True, not making it up. Well, Mark, so what would you specifically do to help me?
So this is why we need Medicare for all who want it. And the way we would structure it is we take something like Medicare, we make it available through the exchanges, and we make it possible for you to buy into that. So if you did have a good plan and you didn't mind paying for it, fine, keep it. But I think a lot of Americans are going to find that we can do better. The bottom line right now is if you do not have health insurance right now, you pay way too much for health care. But increasingly, I'm hearing stories like your families where if you have health insurance, you're paying too much for health care. And the Affordable Care Act went some of the way, but obviously if you're faced with that situation, not all of the way, because how can you expect Americans to be able to cough that up? The whole idea of health insurance is to free you from having to worry about paying for health care for a reasonable premium. And that's not a reasonable premium. As you know, they're going out of their way right now in Washington to gut what's left of the Affordable Care Act, pre-existing conditions and the rest of it, to make it even harder. I am convinced that the public options that we create on the Medicare for All Who Want It system will outcompete the corporate options that are out there. But who knows? Competition's always good. And so maybe the corporate options will decide to be a little more reasonable when they've got that competition nipping at their heels from the public sector. If they step up and do a better job and prove me wrong, so much the better, because the winner is the American taxpayer and consumer. Thank you. All right. Right there, the button.
I just wanted to know, like, everything you say sounds like a good idea and everything, but what are you going to do to get Congress to actually act on it? Because we have a problem. Congress isn't doing much right now.
Right.
So how do we know that this is actually going to happen? How are you going to get Congress to act?
Right. Thank you. There's always the small matter of Congress. And more specifically at the moment, the Senate. The House has passed a lot of good bills. H.R. 1, an anti-corruption, pro-democracy bill that would make it easier to vote. Universal background checks, something that most Republicans, most gun owners, most Americans, most Democrats think is a good idea. Passed in the House, went to the Senate, it's just sitting there. Minimum wage increase that would lift up the income of millions of Americans. The House passed it, Senate's not going to touch it. So there are 2 ways I think you can solve this problem that would be part of my strategy as president. The first way to do it is to remind voters that what we're proposing is popular. I mean, all of the things we're talking about, higher wages, better labor protections, health care for everybody, common sense gun safety, these are things that most Americans want. And that's even true in more conservative states. And so I think a pretty good use of that big 747 they give you when you're president is to fly it into the home district or state of somebody who's standing in the way of progress and remind their voters that they're standing in the way. But that's only the second best answer. The best answer to dealing with somebody like Mitch McConnell is for him not to be the majority leader anymore. And I would argue the best way to do that would be to have a nominee for president with coattails who can speak plain English in the Midwest and go to a lot of these states and campaign for our Senate candidates who are shaping up to be a phenomenal slate of candidates and make sure they get in to have the president's back. Great question. All right. Right here. Yes, sir. Mike's coming to you.
Thank you. Want me to hold it? Thank you. Thank you for your comprehensive plan for rural America. We really need to win back the rural vote from the Republicans like we used to do. But there's a key issue that you don't have in your plan yet. And we're playing catch up here in rural America. There's actually a book written about the Tipton and Cedar County area called Broken Heartland, The Rise of America's Rural Ghetto. And what's missing is that even if you write subsidies to conservation, the market fails chronically. Deregulated free market fails. The Republican ideology fails, and so we need a minimum price floor and supply management. We've got 5 candidates now that are supporting that, and we'd like you to look at it too. With that plan, it's a much cheaper farm bill. It can save $100 billion to $150 billion over 10 years. The free market failure is very prevalent in the 21st century and is projected ahead another 10 years, so it's not an old-fashioned idea. And it makes a lot of money for us, and we make a profit on farm exports. We make a profit on sales to China. There's a bigger trade war of lowering the price floor down and trying to undersell other countries, not just the new trade war that makes it even worse. What do you think?
Right. Thank you for that. And we're looking into that as we develop our agriculture-specific plans based on some of the feedback we're collecting here. I will say one thing that's it's different from what you're talking about, but not unrelated, is that we do touch in this plan has to do with monopolies and consolidation. The way that you're getting squeezed from a chemical provider to a meat purchaser is making it tougher and tougher for farms to stay in business. So you add to that what you're describing in terms of the need for greater price certainty, and I do think we're in a world where we got to recalibrate all of this stuff. We got to look. The farmers that I talk to are prepared to take risks in order to do well, but we have thrown so much uncertainty, in addition to a structure that makes it almost structurally impossible to stay afloat, that we shouldn't be surprised when we keep having these problems. And so I appreciate that, and we'll be researching that as we look toward our agriculture-specific plans going down the line. And thank you. Yes, we'll make sure to collect that from you later on. Thank you very much, sir.
I can take it. Thank you.
Right there in the jacket with the dog. Can't say no to a dog.
Should I give it to the dog?
My question for first of all, it's so nice to meet you. I have been impressed with you from the first cable show that I saw.
Thank you.
But my question for you, my question for every candidate that I have met is, our country cannot go on like this. How do you ensure that you beat Trump?
Very good. Thank you. So you're right. You're right. We can't go on like this. And, in this primary process, I know I'm talking to a lot of voters who have very sophisticated concerns about policy questions, but also most of them, at least in the primary, would vote for a ham sandwich if it was going to replace this president, right? I think we can do a lot of better than do no harm, but let's start by undoing the harms that are happening right now, which means we just plain have to win. Now, here's my concern politically. I think there's a temptation in the party right now to say, let's play it safe. This is all chaotic. We can't take this anymore. So let's have a message that says, let's go back to normal. And the trouble with that is, here in rural America, in the industrial Midwest where I live, normal wasn't working. The business as usual has been failing for a long time. And if we come to be portrayed, as I believe we were in 2016, like we were just defending the system, right? Fairly or unfairly, if we get portrayed like our message is, hey, the system's just fine, and the other guy's saying, I'm going to blow up the system, then a lot of people who are under no illusions about whether he's a good guy still vote for him, right? Just to burn the house down. So now the house is on fire. We got to talk about what comes next. It's why I believe we need to break from the past, where we've had these same conversations, the gun safety conversations, been the same for 20 years, since I was in high school worrying about high school shootings. And we've got to put forward something different. And it's not just about him. So don't get me wrong, like every Democrat, I'm licking my chops for being on a debate stage with him. I got my zingers saved up, I would take a certain therapeutic satisfaction in, for example, comparing my war record to his decision to pretend to be disabled when it was his turn. But having said all that, we got to make it less and less about him and more about you. Because when it's about you, we win. We're the ones trying to get your pay up. We're the ones trying to keep your health care. We're the ones trying to deliver things like paid family leave and better roads and bridges and good public schools. That's what Americans want, which is exactly why he needs us talking about his latest crazy tweet. And so part of why it needs to be me, I believe, is that I represent something completely different. I have the discipline to come back to what matters to us all, in addition to the readiness to confront this president. I've dealt with worse, so I'm not afraid of dealing with this president. Not worse presidents, but worse things in life. And, you know, part of how you win these days is to put forward often the opposite of what you got. And I would say it doesn't get more opposite from this president than a guy like me. Right here, yellow shirt.
So I, like you, are one of those people that's both Christian and Democrat. And you talk a lot about how the Republican Party doesn't own our faith. And I completely agree. But what I want to know is, if you're the nominee, how do you plan to address that conservative right that is just going to vote red no matter what, that can see a president who says, I'm a Christian,
right,
but doesn't act it at all?
Right.
How do you win those people over that just don't see the correlation between the blue and Jesus?
Well, it's a great question, and I think now is a chance like we haven't had before. Because I think many of us for years have been saying, you know, wait a minute, you know, Scripture says that he who oppresses the poor taunts his maker, and you got a party that's dedicated to taking as much money out of support for low-income people as possible, right? You see a Scripture that says we're supposed to welcome the stranger, and you see the way they talk about anybody who looks, prays, or acts differently than them. But what we haven't had up until now is the hypocrisy be this obvious. I mean, and I'm from the home state. As you know, our vice president kind of exemplifies a certain flavor of religious conservatism. But even if you're going by those rules on what it means to be a Christian, which doesn't quite line up with how I read Scripture, but that's how Scripture works. We get different things out of it. But even by the way he reads Scripture, how could you possibly believe that somebody like this president, I mean, there's kids here, so I'm not going to go into some of the things he's done, but it is an offense not only to our values, but to their own. And I think there's an opportunity to present something different. There is an awakening right now among people of faith. And we got to be careful, right? Because ours has always been the party, correctly so, I think, that says that when you're in office, you got to speak for people of any religion and no religion equally. That separation of church and state is really important. And at the same time, if you were a follower of a faith tradition that calls us to lift up the marginalized and tells us that salvation has to do with what we do for the least among us, there is a choice. And we can, more than I think at any time in my lifetime, remind people of how stark that choice is at a moment like this. We better make the most of this moment to help people think for themselves again. Thank you. That's right here.
Mayor, I think you just have time for one or two last questions.
Oh, okay. I'll try to talk fast so we can get to it.
I'll also talk fast. Hi, I'm a Lutheran pastor, and I do a lot of work with people who come to me looking for help, bills and things. And one of the things that I see among a lot of the people who are looking for help is an experience of domestic violence. And I know that there's also a strong correlation with domestic violence among people who perpetrate mass shootings. And so what I would love to hear is what you as a leader, especially either as a mayor or as the president of our country, want to do or plan to do to work against domestic violence.
Yes, thank you. It's so important. And as you said, we're seeing new evidence about the relationship between domestic violence and mass shootings. And the first thing is to break the silence, because this is happening in way more families and way more homes and way more communities than most people know. You probably know because people come to you for help. They might come to you before they go to law enforcement. They may hesitate to go to law enforcement. But as you know, this is a widespread problem. So part of how we deal with it is policy. And there are policies, for example, when we're thinking about gun policy, how about making sure the red flag law disarms domestic abusers, whether it's a spouse or whether it's a boyfriend? Things like the Violence Against Women Act and other legislation that make a strong stand on this issue. But the truth is it's not just policy. It's culture. It's leadership. Whether we have people in office who call us to our highest values or not matters. It flows down through the life of this country. And when you have somebody who devalues women, calls them animals, never misses an opportunity to put people down, that's going to have an effect in our communities too. Because we're talking about the President of the United States. And it's one of so many reasons why we need different kind of leadership in there, not just policy-wise, but just in terms of the moral voice that comes out of the White House, because it is the highest moral as well as policy office in the land. Right ahead.
Okay, last question. Right. So much of the rest of the world has health care for all, and we've had a conversation about health care for all, but it has changed, as I see it, into Medicare for all. I'm covered by Medicare. Between my deductibles for A, B, and D and my supplemental ARP insurance, I calculated the other day I'm paying $7,200. So this is, it seems to me that Medicare for all is a different conversation from health care for all, and that concerns me.
You're right. There's more to this than just getting everybody on some kind of plan. We've just got to make sure the plans work. And there are a lot of reforms. You don't hear about it as much because it's not as glamorous. There's a lot of stuff we got to do under the hood of Medicare to make it actually work for us. We spend more of our healthcare dollar on paperwork and less on patient care compared to just about any other developed country, especially when we're looking at how those countries have delivered healthcare for everybody. Now, I think getting everybody insured will help with that, but we also have to just make a lot of technical improvements. You think about, we've managed to automate the point of sale at a Target, but we haven't been able to automate a lot of the way paperwork moves through the system when you got like a prior authorization. The number of human hands that ought to touch a prior authorization is 0. That's not where we are right now. A lot of it also comes down to prescription drug prices. And I believe that as long as Medicare is prevented by law from negotiating drug prices, we're going to continue to see costs escalate. And that's something we got to do to fix Medicare, no matter how widespread the coverage is. There's more where that came from, but those are some of the things I think we need to do. And your point's well taken. It's not enough to just expand Medicare. We've got to fix it too. One more. Can we sneak one more in? Yeah, right there. Yep, you're up. Hamilton T-shirt.
Oh, okay. So I come from the generation where every time there's a school shooting, we have to memorize where the nearest exit is and how to escape if someone comes into a building with a gun. So what would you, as president, do to make schools and other places safer?
So, thank you for speaking up on that. We put forward an action plan on gun safety to make sure that weapons never fall into the wrong hands. And that includes background checks. It includes doing away with these assault weapons. It includes red flag laws that catch if somebody's got a history of dangerous or violent behavior, keeping weapons out of their hands. But the better answer I can give you, how old are you? 13. This gets me every time because unfortunately this is not the first time I've gotten this question from somebody your age. You shouldn't have to be thinking about where the exit is. You shouldn't have to be thinking about any of this. I remember being 13. Being 13 is hard. Getting through school, just socially, everything. It's hard. It's one of the hardest times in somebody's life. And you got enough to worry about between your homework and your extracurriculars and social life and just the whole being a teenager thing. You got enough to worry about without having to worry about the kind of stuff that's on my mind when I was deployed in the military. So until that has been fixed, that is a failure of people in the policy world. That is a failure of the generation that's in charge. And one of the reasons I'm running, and one of the reasons I'm not waiting my turn, is that I don't want it to have to get to where you're running for president for us to still have not fixed this and have a 13-year-old asking you what's going to go on. We got to fix this now and worry about these and fix them so you don't have to. And thank you for speaking up. I think that's a pretty good note to end on. That's where my sense of urgency is coming from. We got a generation coming up that's going to have its hands full with all kinds of things. Let's do as much as we can on our watch right now so that we'll be proud of how we set them up for success, whether it's school safety, whether it's climate, whether it's an economy that actually makes sense, whether it's growing our rural communities instead of watching them shrink. That's up to us. It's up to what we're doing right now. And I am hopeful that we can get this done in our time. After all, we have to. We don't have the luxury of not being hopeful, even in a difficult time like this. So I'm hoping that I can look to you to spread the word, spread the message, and spread the hope that running for office is worth it, getting involved in is worth it, volunteering is worth it, showing up at a caucus is worth it. And I'm looking forward to staying side by side with you every step of the way until we get to the nomination and onto the White House. Thank you so much for your attention today. Thank you for your support. Thanks for everything that you do. And I will see you on the trail. Thank you very much.